Hello, welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is ALEC COOLEY. I'm a senior advisor here with Busch Systems, and I welcome you to today's program, which is titled Harmonization, Bringing Consistency to Recycling Programs. This is part of our regular, roughly every month, every other month, Green Thinking webinar series that Busch Systems does. If you're not familiar with Busch Systems, we are a manufacturer of recycling and waste bins. For institutional and lots of different settings. And we're not doing a product demo with today's program, but if you ever have interest to learn more about our products, you can certainly reach out to us with Google, and we'd love to talk to you about your recycling and waste bin needs. But for today's program, we're going to be talking about, again, this topic of harmonization. And if I can advance my slide here, I'm looking forward to being joined by three panelists for today's program. We will have Jill Martin, who is a Director of Community Programs with the Recycling Partnership, a national NGO, and I'll let Jill explain more and introduce the partnership. Jill is going to be doing sort of a basic setup, sort of explaining this issue, what's involved with it, and talking about some best practices. And then we'll follow Jill's presentation with CASSIDY Campbell, who is a program manager with the North Central Texas Council of Governments. We'll be giving a case study about what they're doing, working regionally around an education campaign across governments in the Dallas, Fort Worth, and areas around the city. And then finally, we'll follow up with a presentation from Jill HRYCYK, who is a senior planner with Oregon Metro, who will be talking about how they've labeling system for multifamily, again, that extends beyond just the Portland area, but to the surrounding communities as well. So we'll hear a little bit more from them in just a few minutes. If we can, before we jump in, just a quick housekeeping, remind folks, if you have questions that you would like to have the presenters respond to, go ahead and type those into the Q&A area on your dashboard. We also encourage you just to share your own personal experience or to interact with each other if you have comments, or if you want to sort of give a riff off of something that one of the speakers said, go ahead and put those into the chat function. But just keep in mind that anything that goes into the chat will not necessarily be addressed with the speaker. So if you do have something you want them to explicitly respond to, make sure that goes into the Q&A function. The last thing I'd point out is that with the chat, we will have throughout the program, we'll be dropping in links to different resources, things, studies, other things that our speakers refer to. We'll be dropping links into the chat if you want to follow up and learn more about those. We will also have the recording and presentation slides, as well as the resources from today. All this will be archived on our website within the next day or two, and we'll be sending an email to everyone who registered to share that link once it's available. So you don't need to panic if you can't keep up with all the slides. Just know that you'll be able to find them again after today. So I want to start off and just make a sort of a quick setup on my end before I hand it over to Jill. This is a topic that I find personally it is really important, and yet I think is somewhat underrated. So to set the stage, over the decades, local governments and other stakeholders have invested heavily to build recycling infrastructure, to extend access and educate the public how to participate. And yet, even for people with convenient opportunities, many only recycling on occasion, if at all. And contamination rates have stayed stubbornly high over the years. Recycling behavior is complex, and there are many factors that contribute to this, from confusion about packaging design to concerns about whether items even get recycled. Today's program is focused on another issue that I think is, as I said, underappreciated, but one that is essential for us to address. The traditional system for managing solid waste and recycling has always relied on local jurisdictions to design and organize their own collection systems and the public interface with those. Like other municipal services, from water and sewer to public safety, et cetera, there's a benefit to designing recycling programs to be flexible to the local situation with market access or community priorities. But designing thousands of local programs in silos also means that there's very little consistency from one location to the next. And that would be fine if we all lived our lives without ever leaving our home, but we don't. We all obviously we're a society that on the go and we're moving around constantly from home to work, soccer practice, to the park. We get on airplanes and we fly to other towns. So we're always moving around. And yet, as we move around, we're always being presented with sort of a different version of what recycling is. The recycling bins may be green at home, but they might be red at school, or they might be blue, or they might be a different third color. It may even be that you have trash and recycling or compost that are all identical colors. So how do you tell them apart when they're constantly changing? That also, apologies for this confusion. That also applies to just the messaging. Even where programs might be the same and have the same list of materials, the terminology might be different. In one community, this might be a steel can, and another it might be a tin can. And that inconsistency in terms of what can be accepted and all creates another barrier that feeds further confusion. If there's another sort of local service that I think is akin to this, it is with traffic management. When you have people coming down a road, you don't want them to have to stop and focus any more attention than they absolutely need to come to a stop. You want to make sure that they recognize that sign and they stop immediately, because there's no room for error when you do that. And that's the reason that we don't leave local traffic signs to be designed individually. We know there's a value to having this standardized. That is how people know exactly what they're supposed to be doing and how they can react to that. So with that, I want to hand it over to Jill Martin, who is, again, a director of community programs with the Recycling Partnership. I'm just going to set up and talk a little bit more about what harmonization means.
Thank you, Alex.
Go ahead, Jill. Thanks.
Alex, can you hear me okay? Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, ALEC and Busch Systems, for inviting the Recycling Partnership in today to talk about harmonization. Just to let you all know, I'm pinch hitting for my colleague, Zoe Killian, that had a family emergency. So I'm filling in, and you might see me reading some notes, but this message on harmonized recycling is near and dear to my heart. In fact, one of my very first projects when starting at the Recycling Partnership was to write an article in Recycling Today on harmonization. So we're still here 7 years later talking about how important this topic is. So thanks for inviting us in. This is a very important topic, and I'm excited to chat with you all today. So today I'm going to briefly cover who the Recycling Partnership is. Hopefully some of you have heard of us before. I'm going to talk a little bit about restate the lack of harmonization that we have in the system and why that's a problem. Describe 5 key elements where we find of an effective recycling system, and spotlight some case studies on what we've done to help harmonize the recycling system. And then talk a little bit about some resources that you all might be able to take advantage of from the Recycling Partnership to help your program. So with that, let's get started. Hopefully I can advance my slides here. I was said to be patient. Here we go. Who is the Recycling Partnership? Well, the Recycling Partnership, we consider ourselves thought leaders and experts and real world experience who deliver on a mission of transforming the US recycling system. And that is an incredibly lofty goal, to transform the US recycling system. And we do that not alone, but with many, many partnerships. Many partnerships like yourself in communities, MRFs, industry, public sector, all across the supply chain to help us transform the US recycling system. And we have done that, made a dent in the system, and we've recovered over 1 billion pounds of new recyclables captured through funding and support from our partners. And we've diverted over 1.4 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions from entering the environment, worked with over 4,000 recycling programs across the country, offering many grants, over 300 community recycling grants, and over 130 recycling grants to MRFs. So we're starting to make a dent, and we do that through over 90 community private funders that help back our system and in our efforts. And not only just private companies, but also public sector dollars. We work more and more with states, solid waste authorities, regional districts, and communities, putting private dollars alongside public dollars to make an impact on the recycling system. And so thank you to all of our partners. So even though we've made big impact, with all that investment and effort we've done over the last 10 years at the Recycling Partnership, we still ask ourselves, why are only 43% of US recycling households actively participating in the recycling program, and only 24% of recyclables are being captured? And you can find all of these stats in our State of Recycling report, which I highly encourage you to take a look at. So we've done lots and lots of research, and our research tells us that people really support the recycling system, but they're still confused and frustrated by those inconsistent messages that they're getting. And less than half believe their recyclables are made into something new. And we know that confidence and awareness and trust in the system is an indicator of how well the system is going to perform. And so with less than half believing their recyclables are made into something new, we have a challenge ahead of us. 75% of people don't recall receiving any communication about their recycling program. And in-home setups are really insufficient and lacking that point of decision support to decide where it goes, if it's trash, recycling, or compost or other methods. All of this results in higher contamination rates and overall low capture of recyclables. And so what does the harmonization mean? Harmonization really means bringing into accord. And that can mean a lot of different things depending on how you look at it. It can mean aligning all your stakeholders in the recycling system, including MRFs and municipalities and educators, around a shared messaging approach. It could also mean coordinating guidelines so residents see the same instructions at home, like ALEC mentioned, and at work, and when you're out on the go. And it doesn't mean that programs are going to be identical, because that's not feasible all the time. But a unified narrative is what's really important here. And what we always like to say at the Recycling Partnership is it really takes these 5 key elements to design an effective recycling system. And this is how we're going to transform the US recycling system, with these 5 key elements. And harmonization plays a key role in it. But number 1, package needs to be designed for recyclability. We work with brand owners on our material coalitions to really help advance the design of the products so that they're made to be recycled. And then number 2, we need to provide recycling access. We can't expect the system to work if residents don't have convenient recycling access. And so we obviously offer curbside grants to offer that type of access to communities. But what we know also is that just providing access isn't enough. You have to have that recycling engagement piece. And that's where the harmonization comes in and is critical to the system, is that recycling engagement, making sure we have that consistent messaging. And then number 4 is the processing and sortation at MRFs. We offer MRF grants to be able to effectively and process the materials once the residents get them out of their home. And all of that is for naught if we don't have sufficient end markets. So we really believe these are the 5 key elements of an effective recycling system. And harmonization, again, plays a key role in this. And that we find in piece number 3, the recycling engagement piece. So we have a few strategies for harmonizing those messages. Establishing consistent material lists and terminologies used by the MRF sheds. I used to run a MRF, and it's not an easy task, but we actually did harmonize our messaging for 65 communities in Northeast Wisconsin and had one material list, and we looked at it by a MRF shed approach. If all of our material was going to one MRF, we made sure that that acceptable material list was consistent with the MRF that it was going to. Another strategy for harmonization could be just collaborating collaborating your design and outreach messaging so it has consistent colors and imaging and branding. So it has the same look and feel for all the collateral pieces you're putting out. Or it could be a regional outreach campaign, which you'll hear more about from the North Central Texas COG unit that has done a fantastic job at regional outreach. Or you could use your leveraging contracts and regulations to be able to consider adding a harmonized clause in your hauling contracts to require standardization of cart colors or in-mold labels of those carts or hot stamp symbols. That consistency is another strategy that can be used when you're talking about your contracts for recycling. And of course, EPR. EPR is going to be a key tool in harmonizing messaging on a statewide level. And we can look to Oregon, the Implementation Recycling Modernization Act, that implementation that is happening this month, kicking off, and how they are harmonizing their message on a statewide level. Some very good strategies. So a couple examples that I can call that we've worked with is Peoria, Arizona. In 2021, we did a study and we tested 4 different outreach strategies on 4 different collection routes, always with a control group so we can measure our impacts. And so before the program began, Peoria actually had brown recycling containers and tan trash containers. And you can imagine these colors are so close that it was causing confusion to what is recyclable and what is trash. And so we went ahead and replaced all of the recycling lids with a blue lid to really identify that as the recycling container. It included educational flyers along with that strategy. And we saw a reduction in contamination of little over 20% lower contamination compared to the control group by replacing that lid and making it very consistent and apparent throughout the community that that was your recycling container. I'm going to give another example that I don't actually have a slide for, and this is in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where we did something similar. We were actually focused on the quality of recycling, and so we installed smart cameras on the recycling trucks to look in the recycling bins and identify contamination. But what we immediately found is that there was actually 9 different color combination of carts on the curb for recycling containers. Somehow it just kind of got out of control and there were 9 different color combinations. And so we quickly pivoted our strategy there to use the smart cameras to identify all the non-standard recycling carts, and we replaced them with standardized blue recycling carts. That was step number 1. And we're seeing incredible results on reduced contamination level and confusion when we standardize the recycling carts. And my last example is Fort Collins, Colorado. Another example of harmonizing here was really Fort Collins had a subscription service, or what we call open market system, where residents had to call up and this is very common in Colorado and many communities across the country, an open market system or a subscription service where residents could choose their hauler, which means they may have different colored carts or non-standardized carts across the community. And so in Fort Collins, Colorado, we offered a grant of over $600,000 to replace those carts and have 35,000 standardized recycling carts, and all blue for recycling, and then gray was the trash carts, and then green was your yard waste carts. And I think that was the end of that one. So what do we have for you all? We have a recycling solutions hub that offers all of our resources here available for you all for free. We highly encourage you to sign up to our recycling solutions hub, where you can get some more resources to help you harmonize your messaging and your systems, including a MRF survey that can be used to ensure you're educating on the correct acceptable material list. We have guides to communities on MRF contracting. We also have free do-it-yourself sign makers and recycling campaign builders, all that allow you to harmonize and have your message be consistent and easily accessible with free resources. So feel free to sign up for our Recycling Solutions Hub. And I think that's it. And I hope I presented everything Zoe would have presented to you all.
Thank you, Jill. That was fantastic. The Recycling Partnership is doing a lot of great work. I really appreciate the research and the resources you're creating, because this is definitely not something we can all just be doing at our own individual community levels. We need sort of these resources. So my hats off, partnership.
Thank you.
If we can, we're going to pull up a live poll question right now, and so you should see on your screen in a moment this where you can interact with this. But the question is, which, if any, steps has your organization taken to harmonize recycling with your neighboring programs? And define this loosely based on your own situation, but color branding of waste streams, revised rules to be consistent. So I'll let you folks respond to the poll. And while we're doing that, a question for you, Jill. We have one from Alana asking if the Recycling Partnership works with private funders on source reduction, waste reduction to eliminate packaging in the first place. So not just strictly recycling, but also on the upstream side.
Yes, primarily our focus has been on recycling and designing for recyclability, but we know that is not a silver bullet, and you have to look at all of the system, including waste reduction and thinking about eliminating the waste in the first place. And a lot of EPR policies include a waste reduction component. And we have a policy team that works with EPR states that have passed EPR and are thinking about passing EPR to design their legislation to include those components. So I would say that's one strategy that we is in encouraging solid EPR legislation to think about those waste reduction and minimization topics as well. And that's one way we're incorporating that into our work.
Great. And just real quick for folks who may not be familiar with EPR, extended producer responsibility. I know you alluded to it a moment ago, Jill, but that is, we're starting to see this trend now. I forget whether there's 6 or 7 states that have now enacted this legislation, and the basic idea is that you get the packaging and the brand companies who create this packaging, you start to give them a financial stake where they pay into the system to support recycling on the community level, so that it's not just all left to the local municipalities. That's sort of an overly simplistic version of it. And I know we'll hear a little bit more about Oregon's situation with EPR at the end with Jill HRYCYK's presentation. But if we can, Tyler, if we can end the poll now and present the results so everybody can see. And I won't go through all these, but just high level, color branding seems to be the far away the most popular. About 65% of folks have looked to do this. Looks like highlighting common, always acceptable materials is another one that has a good response. But so certainly my impression is we're sort of in the early stages of how do we start to harmonize, and I think this is a good start, and look forward to hearing more going forward of how folks are doing this. Let's go ahead and move on to our next presentation then. So next up we have Cassidy Campbell, who is again a program manager with and circular economy specialist with the Department of Environment and Development with the North Central Texas Council of Governments. And Cassidy, I'll let you introduce yourself and take it from there.
Thank you so much, Alec. I appreciate it. Thank you everyone for inviting me here today. I'm Cassidy Campbell, program manager at the North Central Texas Council of Governments. I'm going to see if I can get these slides to advance here. Hold to be patient. But I'm going to be talking today about our No to Throw campaign, which we did in partnership with the Recycling Partnership. So it looks like my slides are moving now. So I think we should be all set to go. But I'm excited to talk to everyone today about our educational campaign and kind of dig into it a little bit. I'm not going to be able to cover all the ins and outs of it, but let's go ahead and get started here. First off, for those of you who may not be familiar, what is COG? So COG is shorthand for Council of Governments. So we are the North Central Texas Council of Governments, 1 in 24 in Texas. And we cover a 16-county region in the northern portion of the state. It centers around Tarrant and Dallas counties. And most people will probably be familiar with the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, and that's kind of the center point of our region. But our COG is like all COGS, a voluntary association of local government. So we have no enforcement authority. We are really just there to help our local governments and recognizing regional level opportunities and helping resolve regional level problems. So in the Environment and Development Department, we do cover a wide range of environmental programs, but one of our major ones is our Regional Materials Management Program. That one is funded through the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, also known as the TCQ, and it is funded through landfill tipping fees. So we cover a wide variety of different solid waste activities. Basically, there's no limit to it as long as it's solid waste related, but all of our funding and activities associated with this program are funded through our Resource Conservation Council. And that is a group of experts around our region that are, they have expertise in some way, shape, or form related to solid waste, and they're represented by private sector, public sector, nonprofits, you name it. We've got full coverage because we want all perspectives. And then our funding, as I mentioned, we have a lot of leeway with this grant, and we cover a variety of different things and activities. But what we're going to be talking about today is our Know What to Throw campaign, and that was funded through a regional COG managed project. Okay, so now delving into it. Why did we develop an educational campaign related to residential recycling? Now, another thing that I should mention is this is really focused on curbside recycling, residential curbside recycling. But this really kind of speaks to what Jill and Alec were talking about. Quite simply, recycling is just very confusing. There's a lot of different packaging out there. There's a lot of different things that are recyclable separately, not if they're combined. As far as materials go, and so there's a lot of confusion in our region as well. And so what caused us to develop this campaign was we had members from our Resource Conservation Council come to us and say, we are struggling across the region with low participation rates and high contamination rates, and it seems to be a common theme with our presentations here. But the goal that we were tasked with was to find a way to educate residents in our region how to recycle more and recycle right, so that we could capture more of those recyclables that were going to the waste stream, and so that we could reduce the contamination that was entering our recycling stream. The solution seems simple, but it's not. But in any case, the solution was to develop a message that we could amplify across the region to educate residents to know what to throw. And so it was really important that the message be simple and consistent, especially because it was going to be a regional level campaign. So then to that purpose, in 2018, RCC did allocate approximately $660,000 of our funding toward what ended up being Know What to Throw, but started out being called the Regional Recycling Survey and Education Campaign. Okay, so covering a little bit about our campaign development process. For our RCC members, it was critically important to them that our campaign be data-driven. They really wanted us to not be flying by the seat of our pants, just kind of guessing what messaging would have the most impact. They wanted to focus on the challenges that we were facing specific to our region. And so the very first phase of our campaign was intensive data collection. So the first step was a municipal survey. So we did collect information from our local government partners to see what kind of waste collection services they were offering, and also what kind of recycling collection services they were offering. Some of you might not know this, but our 16-county region is very large and very diverse. We have a lot of rural communities that don't currently have waste curbside collection, and so not all of our communities have access to even drop-off recycling, much less curbside recycling services. So in any case, the purpose of the municipal survey was to try to get an idea of the landscape in our region as far as what services were being offered and what materials were being collected and how and what frequency. So then the second stage were our waste characterization assessments. The first one we did do before we started the campaign, and we did two following the kickoff, the launch of the campaign. But the purpose of the waste characterization assessments was to try to determine the composition of our waste stream and recycling stream in the region. And the way that we did that, I keep saying we partnered with Burns and McDonnell and with the recycling partnership for this whole effort. But what we did was we collected samples of waste and recyclables that had been set out curbside by some of our volunteer participating cities. And we sorted those samples at the Dallas-McComas Bluff landfill. And that did help us determine, what kind of materials were in the waste stream and the recycling stream. And so it was able to give us a better idea of particularly problematic materials that we were seeing over and over again, that people were obviously confused about where the proper place was for those materials. The third component is a MRF survey. So doing surveys of every single material recovery facility in our region. The goal of this is to determine which materials were universally accepted by our MRFs and which were universally prohibited, because we really needed our message to be consistent across the region, again, with the goal of cutting down on the confusion about what's recyclable where. We would be able to know with certainty this is recyclable or this is not. So then, after we finished the data collection portion, it was time to develop the campaign. So that was kicked off through a series of regional workshops. So we invited all stakeholders to the table, anybody who was interested in helping us develop the campaign. And the recycling partnership and Burns and McDonnell led these workshops. And basically the data was presented for everyone to review. And then the campaign was developed out of that. And then we also, during those workshops, came up with a campaign implementation strategy. So I'm going to get into those two components here in the next few slides. Okay, so know what to throw. That came out of our workshop as far as our tag name for our educational campaign. But during the discussions in the workshops with our regional experts and with the recycling partnership, we did decide that we wanted to focus our efforts on contamination. And the main reason for that is that targeting people who are already engaged in recycling, but that maybe need a little bit of education about tweaking behavior as far as what goes where, it's an easier lift than trying to engage people who are not currently recycling for whatever reason, whether it's lack of interest or time, or they don't have access. And so anyway, we decided to focus on contamination as our perceived low-hanging fruit. And then one of the main things that came out of the discussions, which I've already kind of heard on a little bit here, is clear and consistent regional messaging. So we needed the message to be consistent and relevant across the entire region. And so we didn't want to get into the weeds and potentially confuse people more about items that may be recyclable in one word, but not in another. You can also see here the examples that I put on the slide, how limited we were in text. With people having limited attention spans and just having things come at them from all ends, it makes it easier for people to digest things quickly if you have very little text and you let the graphics kind of do the talking for you. Then it might go without saying, but it was determined that the promotional activities were going to be led by COG as the regional entity, and then those activities were going to be amplified by our participants. So going back to the discussion about how we were really targeting contamination, this slide right here depicts the top prohibited materials that came out of our MRF surveys. And so these are just the top 5. There's a lot of different materials that are prohibited, but these are the main ones. In our region in particular, batteries are also a big one. It didn't make the top 5, but if you can see the kind of connections here, the pattern is that all of these things are either dangerous to employees, hazardous to the equipment, or they contaminate otherwise valuable recyclables. So anyway, that's for people who are interested in what our top 5 items were as far as contamination we wanted to remove from the stream. Okay, so then focusing in, now that we've developed the messaging, we started to launch. And so this is where I'm going to get into the implementation strategy that we followed. So the first thing that we had to decide was what was going to be our hub. And this is something that the recycling partnership also helped us with. But we did have an existing Time to Recycle website that we spruced it up, we gave it a good facelift, and we used this as our hub that everything circled back to. So almost all of our materials referred back to the Time to Recycle website. We also hosted a quiz. The quiz has since been retired. We're not really sure what we're going to do in place of the quiz yet, but that was another item that the recycling partnership helped us develop. But it was a very simple quiz, and it did kind of evolve over time, but basically it helped us determine how to focus our messaging, because the quiz was very simple, and it asked questions like, is this curbside recyclable, or should it go in the garbage? And so if 90% of people were getting a certain question right, we didn't feel the need to really target a lot of messaging in that direction, because it seems like they've got this. But things, if 90% of people were getting it wrong, like, ooh, maybe we need to focus a little bit on helping get the message out around that particular problem material. Okay, so then continuing on down the path, we had some, kind of three main components when we were implementing the campaign. We had paid promotional activities, and I'll cover the different media that we utilized for our campaign in the next slide. But we, as kind of well, the paid promotional activity is probably the flagship part of it, but then we also had customizable templates that you're going to see a trend here, but were also developed by the recycling partnership, which helps our communities be able to push the messaging out. I had mentioned earlier that people were going to help us amplify the campaign, and so we had this customizable templates that were developed that can be modified as needed. There are some restrictions, because we didn't want to keep the message as high level and relevant as possible, but the logos can be changed out, and the websites can be changed out, and certain other specific things can be switched around. But you can see one example at the bottom here is for City of Garland, and that was a water bill insert, so people can push those out to their residents and spread the word about what should and shouldn't be in the recycle bin or cart. And then also you can see on the right-hand side here, an oops tag. And so for communities that were maybe doing beacon checks and trying to find contamination in their recycle carts, they had just ready-made oops tags that they could just, grab and go. And that really helped our communities. That it's hard to be able to develop these materials yourself. And then the third component was coordinated launch topics. This was something that was kind of centered around our launch, but we did continue it longer than that, because it was designed to leverage the social media algorithms. And so if a lot of different people in communities, there's a lot of chatter out there about one particular topic, it can help things go viral. And so we were trying to leverage that to spread the message even further than where our dollars or just organic posts would have originally gotten us. And so what we did was we sent out notices to our participating entities and let them know, hey, on this particular day, we're going to be saying, keep plastic bags out. Can you guys spread the same message and, share and repost to try to leverage those social media algorithms. Okay, so as far as promotional activities, we really wanted to capture as broad an audience as we could across our region. We do have a very diverse region. And we know that not everybody is on social media. We know that not everybody listens to the radio, and not everybody reads the newspaper. And so it's really important to us to try to use and leverage as many different types of media as we could to reach as many people as we could and be as inclusive as possible. And so I won't necessarily cover everything, but you can see that we had a pretty broad spectrum here of the different types of media that we use to get our messaging out. So as with all things, there come challenges. They are not insurmountable, but they do exist. And so it's helpful to be aware of them. Some of them you just can't do anything about, and some of them you just have to navigate as they come. You guys probably honed in on this when you heard about the 2018 date, but we did our data collection portion in 2018, and we did the launch in 2019, and then COVID hit in early 2020. And that threw us for a loop a little bit, partly because of sensitivity reasons. When there's loss of life, and when there's just something as terrible as COVID-19 going on, you have to kind of modify your expectations and the way that you're doing things to remain sensitive to the fact that people have other priorities. And also it did change the waste stream significantly, and it did contribute substantially to more contamination in the recycle stream. So it was difficult for us to try to determine how much was going well with the campaign when you have a really massive variable like that come up. Then we also had existing local campaigns, which is really cool, but it did hamper our ability to really get the universal coverage that we hoped for in a regional campaign. But it is hard, it's totally understandable from our cities and counties' perspective that if they have a really successful and branded campaign already, maybe it's Randy the recycling rodent, you don't necessarily want to throw him over if it's resonating with your residents already for our cute Carter, the blue recycling cart. So that was another challenge that we are really kind of still working to overcome. And then staff capacity and turnover. When you have people leave and are just short staffed, it's hard to keep the consistency going for a large scale regional campaign. That said, even though there are challenges, it's worth it. I wanted to make sure that everybody on the call knows that the campaign materials that we have developed are free and can be distributed to anyone. The only caveat is that we need to keep that funding statement on all of them, saying that the TCEQ was the funding source. But that's the only thing that has to stay there. Otherwise, materials are free to be distributed and used as needed. So please feel free to grab those and use them to either supplement a current campaign or help develop the foundation for a future campaign. We also heard a lot of feedback that even though our materials did definitely help supplement our larger communities programs, it was really, really helpful for our smaller entities who don't have the time and resources and staff available to develop their own campaigns. And then just as far as some unsolicited advice and suggestions, I would say that partnerships are really critical for probably any kind of a campaign. My only experience is regional campaigns, but those partnerships and relationships, both public, private, you name it, those relationships that's how you get the traction and how you keep things moving and get things motivated. And so lean on those if you have them, if you don't, develop them because they can be really helpful. And then it's not the most exciting thing, but perseverance. I'm told these behavior change campaigns take a very long time to start to move the needle. There is just a different kind of a beast, but just hang in there and don't get discouraged. And you'll get there eventually, and everything that we're doing makes a difference. So just stick with it. And that's all I have today. So thank you again for letting me come, and I'll stick around for questions. And
awesome. Thank you, Cassidy. That was great. Perseverance, I think, is a word probably anybody who's worked in this industry for a while. I think all of us can relate to that. This is a long game. But that's great materials, things that the COG is doing. And I'll just point out again, I dropped into the chat links to find some of the campaign materials that Cassidy was alluding to, and obviously you have her information here too. If we can go to our next, we're going to pull up one more live poll question. So look for this to pop up on your screen in a moment. But if you've tried to harmonize with neighboring organizations or agencies, it's not simple. There are barriers. And so I would love to hear your experience. If you have tried doing this, what have been some of the problems, challenges that you faced, either internal, lack of leadership internally or with neighboring organizations, just programs are too complex? Love to hear more folks responding to that. Cassidy, for you, just a couple quick questions. One from Juliet. What was the relative budget for the ad buys on this project? If you could share it.
That's a great question. So about $330,000 was for the initial ad buys, and then the first $300,000 was for the development of the campaigns. That's what went into hiring the contractors.
Got it. Another one from Zach is just asking, I think you're mostly working with the local communities, the cities, but obviously there are lots of private haulers and all. Can you give a sense of what those relationships look like? How many different haulers are there in the area, and what their role, if any, there was with this?
That's another great question. Yes, we did. We had a lot. So we have, I want to say 5 of the haulers in our region are represented on our RCC, on our Solid Waste Advisory Committee. And they were definitely involved. They were involved in the development of the campaign. They have a lot of concerns for obvious reasons. It's expensive to repair their equipment, and it's very concerning for them if staff get injured. And so they were very involved in developing the campaign and very engaged, and they provided a lot of great feedback when we were developing it. And, you know, in addition to being willing to be interviewed, when we were doing the MERV surveys, they participated in the workshops and the data collections, and basically all of the activities. And so we have very strong, you know, relationships with the private sector here, and not just between COG and the private sector, but our public sector entities work very closely with their private sector haulers in their MERVs as well.
Yeah, great, thank you. If we can close the poll and let's read off. It looks like you know, the cost seems to be the one that pops out the highest, just over 50%, saying that just the cost of trying to implement the changes and harmonize is a barrier, but also just the complexity. I mean, it is difficult when you're sending your material to one MRF and another community might send a different direction. But certainly there are ways that you can find to sort of try and bridge those gaps. I think one of the examples you cited, CASSIDY, of even if different communities have different programs, can you highlight the common materials and really try and shine a spotlight on those universal ones to help people really understand, at least these are the core ones, even if the other ones may vary.
Exactly. Yes. And just try to, you know, fix that part of it first, and then you can get more into the weeds once you're starting to collect all the valuable recyclables and keep the contamination out.
Yeah, great. Well, let's go ahead and move on. If we can close the poll, let me hand it over to Jill HRYCYK, who is a senior planner with the Waste Prevention and Environmental Services for Oregon Metro, and to listen to hear more about what you're doing in Oregon.
Okay. Thank you, Alec. Thank you, both CASSIDY and the other Jill here, and for everybody attending the webinar today. I'm excited to share what we've been doing in our region. So what we'll be discussing is how a region agreed to recycling and waste disposal messaging and design. And I'll go over what those goals were, how we start out with the goals, the process, which I found the most foundational to the entire project, some of the user testing, the outcomes, and then where we're headed next with extended producer responsibility. So just a brief overview about Oregon Metro. So Oregon Metro is a regional government and also a planning agency for the Portland, Oregon area. So the 3 counties, Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah counties. We work on solid waste, land use, housing, parks, and transportation planning. And we also manage, operate, run key venues like our zoo, the convention center, expo center, some performing arts centers. And we serve 24 cities, 3 counties in the Portland, Oregon area. So, but today what we're going to do is talk about trash. We're going to talk trash and recycling. So for us, we have a 2030 regional waste plan. This is something we work on with our local government haulers, the community partners, and it's our blueprint for what we do for our 10-year blueprint. And one of these action items in the 2030 regional waste plan is to implement regional standards for collection containers, colors, signage, and other related information for single-family, multifamily, commercial services. And so that's how we got to designing this decal and signage. So we also know that multifamily is one of the most challenging areas to address recycling and any type of waste disposal out of single-family commercial. And so we really wanted to center on how we can improve multifamily services. And so one of the first actionable steps was creating a regionally consistent decal and signage for multifamily. And then the idea is that when we made it for multifamily, we were also considering how that could work for single family and commercial, so that we didn't have 3 different decals for each different waste stream. So the idea is centering on a multifamily, and then it can be used for the other sectors. So here's the challenge with this. So the challenge right now that we've been discussing throughout this webinar is there's inconsistency, there's contamination. And when I mean inconsistency is actually what happened was the jurisdiction started to create their own decals for what would work for their community. But then what started to happen was the containers moved across the jurisdiction. So then you might get a Clackamas, like Clackamas County might get a City of Portland decal, and Tigard might get something else. So it just started to create a lot of confusion, and there was a lot of inconsistency here. And we also, multifamily has one of the highest contamination rates. And so that was really what our challenge was. And then how are we going to together agree on one regional design? So that's where I would share this. And this is actually what I've learned in previous webinars about project management that I've attended. And what I would say is before the project begins, establish the process and trust the experts. This was probably the most challenging part of the entire project. And we didn't want to have something where later on we were figuring things out. There's always going to be surprises, but we really wanted to establish what was that process, who are the approvers, who's going to consult, who needs to be informed. Lay that out first, and then we can work through the details as the project moves forward. So this is what we know is multifamily is the most challenging. So let's lean into it and lead with it. Local government staff, they know the criteria, they have the experience with education and outreach, and they have the franchise agreements with the haulers. So they are the experts in this area. And then designers, they are the ones that know how to create accessible design. So we want to also trust what the designers know and how they lead with that. And then the community partners, they know the experience firsthand of what it's like to live in multifamily properties, what it's like to interact at the enclosure space. So we want the community partners to select and approve the design. This was, I feel like, different than what often happens, but we decided out of everybody who needed to be the approver, we wanted the community partners to be that. So we started out with some primary design criteria. And so there were a few things that we wanted to have. So we wanted consistency. So we wanted the message hierarchy. We wanted the layouts, the size elements. We also knew that this needed to be accessible. And so actually what we did was we created it in multiple sizes, these decals, but some might be 24 by 10, some might be large different sizes, but we actually did with the smallest size, the 8 by 8 decal, and then from there we could expand and grow. We also wanted familiar typefaces, just something that's legible. Like what Alec was sharing at the very beginning of the presentation is about wayfinding, like whenever you're at a stop sign and just like what is the best thing that would cue you to know that that is recycling. We didn't want to create a new thing for chasing arrows for a recycling symbol. We didn't want to create a new thing. It's like how do people identify? And then accessible colors. So high contrast, ADA compliant, and just using photos, icons to complement the color system. Then we also had additional design criteria. So we know the local governments are out doing the outreach and the education. So we know that they are the ones that can determine what those decal and sign sizes are. They also are the ones that could provide the best information about what to include and what not to include. And they're the folks that are conduit with our haulers too. So they can also have that understanding. We want to prioritize bin identification. So knowing what's garbage, what's yard waste, what's recycling. We want to be clear across language and cultures. So we want to have nonverbal cues as much as possible. We want it to be distinguishable. Because if you think about like if there's a lot that's going on in the property, there's a lot of different dumpsters, roll carts, little tiny bins for glass, like what is going to be, how can we cut through all that noise in the space? We want to show individual photos over group photos. For us in our region, we use a 4-factor language analysis. So it was also making sure that how could we have those translated into Vietnamese, Russian, Spanish, and simplified Chinese? And also for the decals, we didn't want contact information since the haulers can work across the region and be in different jurisdictions. We wanted to have no logos or contact information. But most importantly, it needed to work for the users. So what we know through multifamily research is that oftentimes kids are the ones who take out the garbage as one of their chores. And so if you think about for an 8-year-old, what is going to be the most understandable for the 8-year-old as they're taking the garbage out and which bin to put it in? So what we did was we worked with a design firm and they created 2 designs for testing. I'll show a couple of the designs and we won't get too far into the user testing. If people would like to see it, we have that information. But I think just for the sake of this time, we just want to show this was design A. So this was one version of it. We also have programs that collect for food, for business food scraps. So we had a food only, we have yard and food waste, but you can see that. And then what if the garbage didn't have any decals or any photos to it? Then we had design concept B. This one had a little bit more of a border to it, but you can see that these are individual photographs. And actually, some of these photographs we did get through the recycling partnership. That was one of the groups that we did consultation with. You can see that we have the no items here. And so what we did was we did user testing and community feedback. So we did these types of we worked with some nonprofit organizations. So we co-created this with Trash for Peace and Central Cultural. They're 2 community-based organizations in the Portland metro area. And what we did was we worked with them to develop surveys that were available in those 4 languages, actually 5, including English. And then we had printed surveys, and then we'd also have availability to go over those phones. We used the design A and B as A/B testing to also measure the decal effectiveness. And then we also just got overall consultation, both with environmental promoters, groups that really understand the recycling system and what their preference would be, also how we did the translations. And then we also worked with communities who are not involved in the recycling system and then also try to understand what their preferences were. So B was the option, the one with the border to it. And then part of what we did here was once we had that design selected for us, because we've been working on multi-family service improvements for so many years, this was going to be a visible, actionable step to demonstrate that we were making these service improvements. So we have over 6,000 properties in the metro region, and we worked with community organizations, and we hired a contractor and worked with our local government haulers to go out to re-sticker for all the multifamily properties. So this is giving you a quick snapshot of what the final designs and outcomes are. I'm really excited too, because what could happen is first, with some of these designs, we actually borrowed it because we learned what the city of Seattle was doing. So they're our neighbor up north. So we borrowed some of their designs, tweaked it for what worked in our region. And then what I'm excited about is further in Lane County, like Eugene, Oregon area, they were excited. They took our designs too and adapted it for what worked in their region. So you'll see on the top left-hand side, these are some of the final decal designs. And then what jurisdictions did was they took those designs and then they created their recycling guide. So the top right is Clackamas County's recycling guide. And then the bottom left is the city of Portland's. And then the bottom right is Washington County. So you can see how they took those designs and then they created their own informational brochures and guides to message out and communicate, as well as give additional information, like if they have bulky waste services, if they have battery collection, and then they did that within the designs to make it how it could work. So that leads to, what does this look like for extended producer responsibility? So in 2021, we passed the Plastic Pollution Recycling Modernization Act. So, and then we actually just launched this on July 1st. The program just launched July 1st. And so this is the first for the United States to lead with packaging extended producer responsibility. However, this is going to be rolling out in Colorado, California, Washington, Minnesota, Maine. More states are signing on to this. So what does this look like when we harmonize for our region? What does that look like for the state? And then as the producer responsibility organization, Circular Action Alliance, there's a lot of like different words here, but Circular Action Alliance is the producer responsibility organization, and they have been taking on more of that role for all these EPR programs across the US. So I'm sure they're looking at how can we do harmonization nationally? And so where does this, like, how does this start to line up with the work that we've been doing locally? So what I'll share is we are, like I said, this program just launched on July 1st. This means that across the state of Oregon, we have one consistent recycling list. It's called the Uniform Statewide Collection List. So it's really exciting because for many decades, the Portland metro region's been the one that's had the most access to recycling. So this actually gives an opportunity for the more rural and just like areas on the coast, in the mountains, in Eastern Oregon and the high desert, everywhere have that same access to one recycling list. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the work that Circular Action Alliance did with actually the Recycling Partnership. And so what I was really excited about is that they have the same color as we used, and the colors like the glass, the recycling, and then they have that same Chasing Arrow logo. They also have the same font. So it's really nice that it can help with that transition of what this looks like. Because as you can see over to the right-hand side of like Washington County's brochure, recycling is only about like 30% of the waste disposal messaging that we have. So we have to look, and then we also want to move more upstream to waste reduction, like to waste prevention and reuse and share. So that's where we're starting to look at how can we simplify the recycling message so we can just start to do more of that upstream type messaging. So that's what's exciting about the extended producer responsibility is the fact that we can start to look at those, and it has a similarity, so it's not too different from what we had before. And I'm going to wrap it there. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Jill. Again, another great story, an example of what you're doing in Oregon and how to be able to coordinate these better. Cassidy and Jill Martin, if you want to turn on your cameras too, we can. We're going to make this sort of officially a 75-minute program. I'll have a couple of closing notes, but we do have a few minutes for questions. I've got a couple here that have already come in, but I just want to throw out again for if you do have follow-up questions for Cassidy, Jill, go ahead and put those specifically into the Q&A function, and I'll call them out as we go along. Jill HRYCYK, just for you, just a real quick one. This just came in from an anonymous person that was asking, just for the glass, for the decal, you have orange as the color for that. Was there a specific reason why orange?
I wonder if, I forget where there was a lot of research that was done into the color consistencies. And I believe that there was in recycle, and Jill Martin, I wonder if you have that information for that. It's, I wonder if that orange was more commonly used nationally for glass. Red always indicates hazardous, and I just saw somebody posted in the message about reuse. Maybe reuse I mean, this is a new venture, so maybe purple is the new reuse, like some Prince borrowing, but yeah.
I actually can answer that question.
Okay.
With reuse, there's actually an organization called Perpetual in PR3 that has a process where they've actually been working over the last couple of years to design standards around for the reuse industry to try and avoid some of these inconsistencies. And one of the things that they are doing is working with stakeholders in the reuse industry to try and come up with, let's agree in advance, this is going to be the color so we don't find ourselves in the same trap. And I know orange was the color that had been that's been discussed for many years, but I think more recently there's a consensus that purple might be the official sort of endorsed color
For
going
reuse.
forward for reuse specifically.
And I saw that question additionally, just to clarify too about glass, is we do collect that separately. It's a safety issue to have the glass in the recycling bin with broken glass there. So we do collect it separately. So that's the reason we did have to have a different color waste stream for that.
Yeah, excellent. Cassidy, there's this I think was mostly for you, and I think I saw that you might have answered this in the chat, but if you could just also for the full audience, it's a question from Kelly. Kelly mentions that they're currently using a quiz for residents to get their cards back, but have just been using low budget Google Forms. She was asking, what software did you use for your quiz, and were there any? Were you able to see the results? Did anything stick out?
So I'm not really in a great position to answer that. So the recycling partnership actually did develop our quiz, and even though we hosted it on our site, they handled the software on their end, but they did use Riddle. And our comm specialist at the time handled, the downloading of the data and any other kind of information, and he was the one who managed any kind of evolution as far as adjusting the questions. But I did find the information that was put out by Riddle and the functionality of the quiz to be very good. I thought it was simple. It's simple for somebody who's not very good at technology like myself to figure it out. And so, but I don't know. Jill might be able to provide a little more insight. I'm not sure how deep the knowledge goes specific to our quiz, or if they use it for other organizations. But I had no complaints and problems with it, and it did seem very simple and easy to use, and collected the answers and responses very well. So I liked it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had to move locations, so I missed the questions that were posed. So I think it's something about a quiz, and is it, Alec, could you repeat the question in regards to the quiz that we developed for Cassidy and team?
Yeah, I did. One part of the question was just around the software that was used to do the quiz. In their case, this person asking the question had mentioned they had used just Google Forms, but if there was a better system, and also anything that stuck out, lessons learned from doing the quiz, from doing quizzes.
Okay, I don't have the answer off the top of my head, but I will find it and make sure that the audience gets the answer.
Excellent. Great. And just to come back to the question of, or to the issue of colors again, and color standardization, I think this has obviously been sort of a moving part. Even, let's say for the moment, we just focus on recycling and mixed recycling. I've been in this industry for 30 plus years, and it's been all over the place, but it seemed like green for a long time was maybe kind of a standard, and then it was blue. And it's been my observation that in more recent years, the last 10, I feel like there's a definite consolidation around blue as sort of a universal, at least for general streams. I know California is one example where it's actually been written into state law, where their legislation 1383, I think over the next 10 years is going to require that all recycling and waste diversion programs have to standardize around blue for recycling, green for compost and organics as part of state law. And I mean, speaking for myself, I think that would be fantastic if we could actually sort of make this more than just sort of it would be nice, but actually try and put some teeth into it. Earlier, there was a question somebody had just around on a national level. Why don't we do this similar to what Germany does? And the problem is that we are such a decentralized industry. It's how can we better leverage coalitions and all to have more of a nudge pushing people in that direction. But let me see if we have other questions that have come in. Yeah, I see James made reference to with coming back to the reusable cups. There are some other examples, like Petaluma in Sonoma County did a pilot project with the Closed Loop Fund recently. It was using purple as the color there as well. And some other great examples. If other folks have other examples, I encourage you to share those in the chat. We will be, I'll point out after the program, we'll make a sort of an edited version of the chat available to view, so we could, folks want to follow some of the points being made in their follow-up, you'll be able to do that. Another, I guess, a question for the whole panel. This is to step back. We know there are challenges when we talk about trying to do harmonization. There are these challenges, leadership support, et cetera. And just to focus on that for the moment, is there any advice, lessons learned for how you get buy-in from leadership and stakeholders from different communities, different haulers, and different folks? Are there any sage wisdom for how we can get them to understand, even if they don't necessarily focus on recycling on a day-to-day level, just the importance of how doing the standardizing, how this supports recycling? I would love to hear any thoughts you have of how do you make that value proposition to leadership who might just think in terms of, we just want to do our own thing. Jill Martin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, Alec, I hope I don't have too much background noise, but this one, I think it's all about data and showing, I think you can show a correlation of your contamination rates and what that means, dollars and cents at the MRF. And so as a community, I would look to my contamination rate, and if there's any contamination charges or things like that, that really impact your budget. So under recovered material and contamination is a direct result of, confusion and frustration and lack of harmonization. And I think if you can use that data in your leadership and your decision makers, showing that data and how that affects your bottom line can really help with the sales of why harmonization and consistent messaging is critical to the effectiveness of your recycling program across the board.
It's not just a feel good. There's an actual concrete bottom line to this. Yeah. Cassie or Jill, or either of you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was gonna, Jill just took the words out of my mouth, is perfect, but Texas and the political climate is a little bit unique. And so we've tailored our arguments, just like what Jill was saying, to focus on the economics of it. There were some slides that I had to cut out due to timing, and so people have a chance to peruse some of the results that came out of our waste characterization assessments and some of the estimates on the materials that were ending up in our waste stream. And there was an estimate that annually somewhere around $122 million of valuable recyclables were being landfilled in our state. There's more, the TCEQ has a lot more data too, but when you present those numbers to people and say, these are jobs that are lost, these are materials that are now gone forever that could have been cycled back through the system and, earned $122 million, injected that into the economy. And then likewise for the MRFs, when their employees get injured or when the equipment is, even if it just gets shut down, when we're trying to roll things through and there's a tangler in there and it doesn't damage the equipment, they have to pause operations, and that's a problem for your bottom line. And so, and then that cost gets passed back to the consumers that are, having the recycling services. And so we found those arguments to be pretty effective as well, as far as, getting people on board with making those changes and understanding the value of this education and where it can really lead.
Yeah, great. Certainly to your point, all the material that you're not capturing, that you're going into the landfill, you've already invested in your collection and processing infrastructure. That's material that you could be helping to amortize those expenses and justify that. And so you're investing in this underutilized infrastructure that just drives up the cost without that material to go through it. Jill?
Yeah, and another angle I'd put on this as well is it is a lot of cost for haulers to change out their equipment to standardize the color system. So actually through our regional service standards, we had done some research and looked at when we phased in color standardization for multifamily to be blue for recycling, black, gray, we had a 7-year phase-in period. So it gave an opportunity for haulers, if they were switching out equipment they needed to right away, they could start to do that. But then there was a 7-year timeline because we knew the expenses and the costs that would be if they did it all like within 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. Infrastructure is expensive, and doing it on a dime is not feasible. But having a pathway makes sense. We're getting to the end of our time, so if I'm gonna just do a couple of closing slides just to take us out. Just want to point out, as I mentioned earlier, the recording as well as the slides, all these resources, links that have been going into the chat, all these will be available on our Busch Systems website in the next day or so. We'll be sending out an email to everyone who registered so you know where to access this if you want to come back to them. And also want to point out we have going on 4 years now of webinar programs that we've been archiving these recordings from. In recent years, we've had a lot of great programs and from a number of these topics that you can see up on your screen, from what we did last month on labels and signage to rebuilding confidence in recycling, bin standards, et cetera. So encourage folks to look for those on our website under the resources area. And encourage you to save the date for our next program. We'll be taking the month of August off, but when we come back in September, just after Labor Day, we'll be focusing again on this topic of behavior, but going more specifically into behavior change. What are some of the case studies, best practices for how we actively influence folks? So we're going to have presentations from Jennifer Tabanico, who is the president of Action Research, which is the firm that develops community-based social marketing and other similar types of outreach campaigns around waste and sustainability. And we'll also have Gretchen Engbring, who is a behavioral psychologist who works with Stanford University Sustainability Department and helps to plan outreach engagement activities for the campus there. So we'll be hearing some case studies and best practices. So look for that announcement in the near future. And again, I want to thank Jill Martin, Cassidy Campbell, and Jill HRYCYK. Great work that all of you are doing, and really appreciate you sharing with us today. And keep up the good work, and look forward to hearing more about what you're doing down the road. And then just very last, we're about to, as we end off the program, we'd love to get your feedback. You should see a quiz or a Zoom forum pop up with a couple questions to get your feedback. If you have notes you want to share with the speakers, etc., please leave a note for that. And if you don't see it on your screen right away, you should also get an email the next day for this. Thank you, everybody, again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.